Picture a weary traveler riding into town, dusty, exhausted, saddle sore. He ties his horse to the post, pushes through the door of the hotel, a warm lobby, a smiling clerk, a clean room waiting upstairs, a hot bath, fresh sheets, a full night of uninterrupted sleep. That's the movie version. That's the version that makes the frontier look almost civilized. Now let's talk about what actually happened. Because in 1875, checking into a frontier hotel wasn't a luxury. It was a gamble with your health. The grand hotels existed in San Francisco, in Denver, in New Orleans, marble lobbies, gas lighting, linen tablecloths. Those places were real, but they were the exception. For every grand hotel in a wealthy city, there were 100 frontier lodging houses scattered across the plains and the territories. Rough wooden buildings thrown up in a matter of weeks. Thin walls, low ceilings, floors that creaked and sagged, and inside those rooms waited things that no Hollywood film ever showed you. Shared beds with complete strangers, mattresses alive with insects, a smell that soaked into your clothes and followed you for days. This is the story of where the frontier traveler actually slept, and why, by morning, he often wished he hadn't. Let's start with the most uncomfortable truth of all. You didn't rent a room in a frontier hotel. You rented a spot in a bed. That bed already had someone in it. Bed sharing was standard practice across the frontier. Hotels were overcrowded. Demand was constant. Space was limited. So the solution was simple. Pack as many bodies into each room as physically possible. 2 strangers to a bed was common. 3 was not unusual. In the busiest cattle towns during drive season, 4 men might share a single sagging mattress, head to foot, shoulder to shoulder. Now think about who those men were. Cowboys who had been on the trail for 3 months. Drifters who hadn't seen a wash basin since spring. Gamblers, laborers, and traveling salesmen, all carrying the full biological record of their journey on their skin and in their clothes. The man next to you smelled like dried sweat, horse, and tobacco. His wool coat was stiff with grime. His boots came off, and the smell that followed was something you couldn't unexperience. The mattress itself sagged in the middle, a deep, body-shaped depression worn into the straw, filling by months of use. Every person who lay down rolled toward the center, toward each other. There was no personal space, no privacy, no way to pretend the man breathing heavily 2 inches from your face wasn't there. You lay in the dark, stiff, uncomfortable, listening to a stranger snore, and you called it a night's rest. But the strangers in your bed were the least of your problems, because the mattress had other residents, permanent ones, bedbugs, flat, rust-colored, almost invisible until they moved. They lived in the seams of the mattress, in the cracks of the wooden bed frame, in the gaps between the floorboards. They came out at night, drawn by body heat and the carbon dioxide of sleeping humans. And they fed. The bite itself was painless. You didn't feel it happening. You felt it the next morning. A cluster of small, intensely itchy welts across your arms, your neck, your ankles. The kind of itch that didn't respond to scratching. The kind that got worse the more you tried. And bedbugs weren't alone. The straw-filled mattresses were ecosystems. Fleas jumped from the last guest's clothing into the ticking. Lice transferred from unwashed hair to unwashed pillow. The entire bed was a living, crawling community of parasites. Hotel owners knew. They weren't ignorant of the problem. They just had no effective solution. Some tried the kerosene treatment, pouring flammable liquid into the cracks of the bed frame. Trying to drown or suffocate the bugs, it killed some of them. It also soaked into the wood, into the mattress, into the bedding. So now you were sleeping in a bed that smelled like kerosene and was still full of bedbugs. The ones that survived the treatment seemed almost angrier for it. And at night, in the thin darkness of a frontier hotel room, you could hear them. A faint, dry rustling in the walls, a barely audible movement in the mattress beneath you, the sound of something small and persistent that had been there long before you arrived and would be there long after you left. Maybe you could wash it all away, a bath, clean water, a fresh start. That was the idea. Here's the reality. Most frontier hotels had one wash basin per floor, a single ceramic bowl on a wooden stand at the end of the hallway, shared by every guest on that level. The water in it was changed infrequently. By midday it was gray and lukewarm. By evening it was cold and opaque. By the time the last man used it, it was closer to mud than water. The towel hanging beside it was communal, one towel. For everyone, it was replaced when the management remembered, which was not often. By the end of a busy week, that towel was stiff with dried grime, dark at the edges, smelling of every face and every pair of hands that had used it before yours. If you wanted an actual bath, you could request one. For an extra fee, a tub would be brought to your room, filled with water heated over a fire downstairs, carried up bucket by bucket. It took time, it cost money, and the water was used more than once. The man before you had already bathed in it, maybe two men before you. The water was lukewarm at best, gray and soapy, and carrying the biological residue of strangers. You lowered yourself in, and you told yourself it was better than nothing, because it was. Barely. Close your eyes. Imagine the smell of that room. Start with the tobacco, stale, cold tobacco smoke soaked into every surface, the walls, the curtains, the mattress. Every man who had ever smoked a pipe or a cigar in that room had left something behind. A permanent, acrid layer that never fully aired out. Now add the wool. Damp wool clothing draped over chairs and bedposts, the sour animal smell of wet fiber that had absorbed weeks of sweat. Heavy and warm and inescapable in a room with one small window that rarely opened. Now add the chamber pot. Every room had one. A ceramic pot stored under the bed for nighttime use. Because the outhouse was outside, in the dark, in the cold, and nobody wanted to make that trip at 2 a.m. The chamber pot was emptied in the morning, in theory. In practice, it was sometimes left for a day, sometimes 2. In a small, poorly ventilated room, the smell of a used chamber pot was sharp and fecal and completely inescapable. It mixed with the tobacco and the wool and the damp wood of the walls. It mixed with the faint, sweet smell of the rotting straw inside the mattress. The result was a layered, suffocating odor that hit you the moment you opened the door. An odor that announced, clearly and without apology, exactly what kind of place this was. And you unpacked your bag anyway, because it was raining outside, and this was the only room left. The walls of a frontier hotel were not walls in any meaningful sense. They were suggestions, thin planks of green lumber nailed together quickly, warped and gapped as the wood dried. In cheaper establishments, the walls between rooms were canvas sheets stretched over a wooden frame. Fabric. That was all that separated you from the next guest. You heard everything. The man in the next room coughing, a deep, wet, persistent cough that went on for an hour. The kind of cough that, in 1875, you recognized as something serious, something contagious. You heard arguments, raised voices, and the thud of boots on floorboards. You heard snoring so loud it seemed to come from inside your own skull. And below all of it, rising through the floorboards from the saloon downstairs, the constant noise of the night, piano music, laughter, the crack of a breaking glass. The Frontier Hotel was never quiet. Not at midnight, not at 3 in the morning. The noise was relentless. And the darkness offered no comfort, because in the darkness, the sounds felt closer. The coughing next door felt like it was in the room with you. The rustling in the mattress felt louder. The thin wall between you and everything outside felt thinner. You were never truly alone, and you were never truly safe. If you survived the night, breakfast waited downstairs. A communal table, long and narrow, with benches on both sides. Men packed in shoulder to shoulder, eating fast. Nobody talked much. The food was whatever the cook had available. Salt pork fried in its own grease. Biscuits that were either burnt or underdone. Coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the previous Tuesday. Occasionally, eggs, if the eggs were fresh. If they weren't, you found out the hard way, there was no refrigeration. Meat that had been sitting in the kitchen overnight in summer heat was served without question. The smell of it was sometimes a warning. Most men ate it anyway, because hunger overruled caution, because there was nowhere else to go, and because on the frontier you learned quickly not to ask too many questions about what was on your plate. Here is the honest truth. For many travelers, a night in a frontier hotel was more exhausting than sleeping on the open trail. At least on the trail, the air was clean. At least on the trail, the only things sharing your bedroll were the ones you'd brought with you. The Frontier Hotel was not a refuge. It was another version of the same brutal, unforgiving world outside its doors, just with a roof over it. The Wild West was not just a battle against outlaws and harsh weather. It was a daily, grinding battle against filth, against insects and contaminated water, and the biological reality of thousands of people living without sanitation. The hotel was where that battle followed you to bed, where it crawled into the mattress beside you, where it waited in the walls, and where it was still there, patient and persistent, when you woke up in the morning. That was the price of a night's rest on the American frontier, and most people paid it without complaint, because the alternative was worse. So here's the question I want you to answer. Could you survive a night in a shared bed with a stranger and 1,000 bedbugs? Or would you take your chances on the open trail? Drop your answer in the comments. And tell me, which part of the Frontier Hotel would you find hardest to deal with? The shared bed, the bugs, the smell, or the paper-thin walls with a coughing stranger on the other side? I want to hear from you. If this kind of raw, unfiltered history is what gets you out of bed in the morning, unlike the frontier travelers, hit that subscribe button right now. New episodes every week. See you in the next one.